Good morning. This is your lonely old lady here again. It's about 6:30 in the morning and I'm getting ready to fix my breakfast. And yes, I do get up early. I'm up at about 6 o'clock in the morning every single morning, even when I'm not working. And I am not working today, but I'm still up at 6 in the morning. And that is an option that I have. I don't have to worry about waking up somebody else or making too much noise. I can do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, and how I want to do it. And so that's what I'm going to do. There are drawbacks, of course, but the upside is always you get to do whatever you want to do and nobody's going to complain. And one of the things that I do when I make it in the morning is I fix my breakfast. And my breakfast usually consists of kind of the same thing. It's oatmeal, and it's a recipe for oatmeal that I do use. And one of the things that a lot of people have problems with fixing food and things like this, and especially this type of thing, is how do I fix just one serving of oatmeal? Because the packages all have the recipe for oatmeal on the packages and the same with everything else, but it makes like at least 4 to 6 servings of oatmeal. And what are you going to do with 4 to 6 servings of oatmeal if you live alone? Oatmeal is not one of those things that likes to store well. It's not one of those things that are going to taste really good and when you do store. And for a long time, I didn't eat oatmeal. And one of the reasons I didn't eat oatmeal was that my grandmother took care of us when we were little. My parents, when we moved from Detroit to Indiana, my parents had a job in a restaurant in Chicago. And so the transportation wasn't really good. They didn't have a car. So they had to take a train, and it was expensive at that time to take trains every single day back and forth. So they would stay in Chicago for a week or two, and then they would come back home. Meanwhile, my grandma took care of us. And my grandmother, I'm a bad cook, but she was really a bad cook. I'm not sure how she managed to raise her children and have them live, because I remember her oatmeal breakfast. She used to fix breakfast for us, for oatmeal for breakfast for us, and oh my gosh, this oatmeal was bad. For some reason, she would put it in the pan and she would cook it and cook it and cook it and cook it, and by the time she got through cooking it, you almost needed a chisel to get it out of the pan, and let alone get it into the bowl. And then, of course, cleaning up afterwards by the time the oatmeal, that leftover oatmeal, because it was always, whatever the package said to use for oatmeal, that's what she used. And so she made like enough oatmeal for an army. So it would stay in the pan. And by the time we got to doing the dishes or anything like that, that oatmeal was really hard in that pan. I'm here to tell you, it was like concrete. And so for a long time, I would not eat oatmeal because I remembered the oatmeal there. But then I found out that oatmeal is good for me, and it's good for diabetics. The oats in it is very good nutritiously. So in order to make one serving of anything, it's just simply doing some math. So you have to know how many servings are in the recipe that the box talks about, and then you just have to cut it down to one serving. So I will be making a single serving of oatmeal this morning, and I'll eat it for breakfast. And the other thing that I do in the mornings, again, because I'm a lonely old lady, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want to. When I was married and had kids, I have a show that I have watched for like 50 years. Yes, 50 years. And they used to always complain because I'd get home from work and I always recorded it. And I'd get home from work and I would sit down and I would watch this show. It's a whole hour. Wow, an hour out of your day. And they would complain about it. They would constantly be complaining because I wanted to watch that show once a day. So now, when I'm through with my oatmeal, I will go into my computer room because this show is still being showed, but it's streaming on the computer, so I don't have to be there at the time that it's airing necessarily. I can watch it, again, when I want, how I want, and not have anybody complaining about the fact that I watched this show. And yeah, you wanted to know what that show is? Yeah, it's my one guilty pleasure. And it's a soap opera called Days of Our Lives. It's been on for a long time, and I've been watching it almost as long as it's been on. So right now I'm going to get to setting up for my oatmeal. So I'm over here by my stove ready to fix my oatmeal, and I have a small pan because you don't need to make one serving of oatmeal in a large pan. So I have a small pan here, and the recipe for oatmeal or any grain at all is a simple formula. And it's generally, if it's rice or couscous or anything else, it's generally the formula for making oatmeal or any other grain is actually 1 part grain or oatmeal and 2 parts of water. So in order for me to make a single serving of this oatmeal, I'm going to take, and I've got my ingredients, I have them together so that I can do it quickly and I don't have to worry about what I'm doing. And one of the things that I have is my oatmeal and some other things that I have. Our church has advocated storing food in case of an emergency. And I find sometimes that I need to start using some of this food because it's mostly good for about 30 years. And I started doing this at least 20 years ago. So I thought, you know, I haven't had any emergencies where I have to worry about having this canned stuff. But here's how we do it. It's done in these large cans, and we have that can was full when I started out, and so it's about almost down to about 1/4 of a can left. So that's, I don't even have to buy the food for that. And there's other things that I use my food storage for as well, because it is food, and it will, even though it's dried, it will ultimately get beyond its expiration date. So I'm going to start out by I put my 1/2 cup of water in my pan, and you want to add a little bit of salt. These grains don't have salt or anything, any kind of spices, and you don't need a lot of salt. I don't like a lot of salt. I don't like my food tasting salty, so I use a salt shaker. Don't take your box of salt and pour it in there. You're going to get way too much salt, and then you're not going to like your oatmeal. So I am going to just shake some out of my salt shaker into the pan. And the other thing I do is you want to put some kind of an oil in it. And the box usually says use butter. And I find that butter is a little on the expensive side, and so I don't use butter necessarily. What I do use is I use olive oil. And I just pour about 1 tablespoon of olive oil into that water. And at that point, I turn my stove on, and I start it out on high. And what you want to do is you want to get your water to boil before you put your oatmeal in. Don't put your oatmeal in, otherwise it gets way too done. So I'm right now just going to be kind of waiting until this water starts boiling. Okay, my water is at a full boil right now, so I'm going to go ahead and add my 1/4 cup of oatmeal. That's a 1/2 cup of water and a 1/4 cup of oatmeal. I'm going to add that all at one time to the water. And the water will start foaming up a little bit. And when I do that, I'm going to let it come back to a boil, which only takes about 30 seconds. And then I'm going to put my timer on for 4 minutes. And I'm going to turn the dial on my stove down to about level 2, which is a nice simmer. And it'll kind of cool off, and you have to stir it once in a while. You don't have to sit there and stir it all the time. But you do kind of, because it's only going to take 4 minutes to do this. So it's definitely, you don't want to you can, at this point, kind of walk away from it and come back to it, but you need to stir it periodically so it doesn't start sticking to the bottom of the pan. Because what's going to happen anytime you're cooking these grains is the water is going to absorb into the grain, and so it kind of plumps up the grain. And if you let it cook for too long, eventually the water will all be sucked up. And guess what? Then it'll start burning to the bottom of the pan, and then you have grandma's oatmeal. And I do not want grandma's oatmeal. So I am going to stir it every now and again. And I usually just stay by here and wait for it, because it is only 4 minutes, and so I'm not going to worry about walking away. Okay, the oatmeal's done. 4 minutes has gone by. I'm going to make sure that I turn my stove off, because being a lonely old lady, sometimes I have a tendency to forget to turn the stove off. And it's not going to do much of anything, but it could overheat, and I don't need to have a fire. So this is the consistency of oatmeal that you want. It's not really hard or anything. It's kind of loose and it's creamy. So I am going to put that in my bowl. And that is 1 serving of oatmeal. And that's what 1 serving of oatmeal looks like in my bowl. And so the next thing I'm going to do is I like to have a little bit of brown sugar in my oatmeal. And yes, I'm diabetic, but you know, a little bit of sugar is not going to hurt anybody. It's just a carb. So as long as you keep track of your carbs, you're going to be fine eating sugar. Sugar is another carb. It just look up how many carbs there are and how much sugar you're going to put in it, and then you just keep track of it. And I keep track of all those things on my iPhone. I have a little app that I put on there called Glucose Buddy, and I keep track of my carbs that way. So I can have some sugar, but you don't want to fill up too much sugar, because then you won't get anything nutritious in your body. So I'm going to put, maybe a little small teaspoon of brown sugar in my bowl, and then I mix it up. And I'm going to add a little bit of milk, and voila, I have my oatmeal breakfast in the morning, and it'll keep me pretty well until lunch. Oatmeal is pretty filling. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pour my milk on my oatmeal, then I'm going to go into my computer room and I'm going to watch my program, as I usually do. And so stay tuned for another episode of A Lonely Old Lady, and see how we lonely old ladies make it through the day.